Hello, NAFI members and flight instructors. John Niehaus, Director of Program Development for the National Association of Flight Instructors. And as always, I am pleased to welcome you to another episode of the NAFI More Right Better podcast, the podcast for flight instructors on the go. And today, the episode is brought to you by the NAFI Special Interest Groups Program, or SIGs for short. We started this about 5 months ago, and we started with the Rotorcraft Instructors Group, and we've since expanded just about one a month ever since it started. We're up to 5 special interest groups, and it ranges anything from the Rotorcraft group I already mentioned to Glider Instructors Group, Instrument Instructors Group, New Instructors Group, and instructors who teach other instructors. So really, it's all about getting like-minded instructors or like-interest instructors and get them together so they can talk about what things are meaningful to them, what works, what doesn't work, and their experiences so that they can kind of network together and find just cool discussions to have. So it's been really fun so far. If you're interested, I highly recommend you go to the NAFI website at nafinet.org. Check it out. It is members only, so you will have to join. But certainly you're welcome to do so. And the other cool thing about it is all of these groups came from you, the members. So if you've got an idea, you want to host one, let me know. And we'll set it up. We'll get it out on the website. We'll let the members know and get the group together. So if you've got any ideas on what kind of interest groups you'd like to have or see, send me an email, jniehaus, Niehaus, at nafinet.org, and we'll make it happen. So anyways, the presentation that you're about to listen to is a discussion I had earlier this year with 4 instructors who specialize in light sport flight instruction. It's kind of an area where a lot of us don't really know what it's all about. They don't really understand what the restrictions are, what types of airplanes are classified as light sport, and why it's cool, why it's fun. And so these instructors who are NAFI volunteers, they took the time out of their day to have a quick educational discussion with me on what it means and why it's cool. So without further ado, what is light sport instruction and what is LSA flight instruction, with my special guests, Krishnan Swaminathan, Dustin Jones, George Allen, and myself. Thanks. Welcome to the NAFI Briefing Room. It is our online video series where we take topics from the industry and from our members and get a group of instructors together to try to clear up the issues. Today's topic is light sport aviation and light sport flight instruction. What is it? What does it mean? And why is it awesome? So I have 3 instructors with me today. I have Krishnan Swaminathan, and he's out of Van Nuys, California. I have Dustin Jones out of Sacramento, California. And I have George Allen from Mansfield, Massachusetts. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
So I set aside some questions, and we'll just kind of go down the list and see if we can't clear this up for everybody, or at least make an attempt at it. For those that don't truly understand, what exactly is light sport aviation? Krishnan?
I would say it's a kind of a reduced or redux version of getting into aviation in terms of something that's a stepping stone into private aviation, as well as being a sort of an end in itself for people who want to choose the criteria within what they want to operate. You know, it can be a very economical and sort of easy on your time version of what most people perceive to be the traditional system to get into the certification.
Mm-hmm. Dustin.
Yeah, I would say that especially out here in Northern California, I see sport aviation as a way to be able to exercise the privilege, enjoy the privilege of flying certain types of aircraft that if you were to have to achieve a private certificate would be a lot more work. So, for example, we have gyroplanes that are being flown under sport pilot certificates, or I don't see a lot of trikes, but there are some out here. And so that's a nice way to earn that certificate, be able to carry a passenger, enjoy those privileges, but not have to invest as much as what it would have taken to do that under private pilot certification. We also see, of course, pilots that are concerned about that first medical. And so they look at those limitations of sport pilot and say, yep, I can live with that. And they choose that route so that they don't necessarily have that door closing them in the future.
Mm-hmm. George?
Yeah, absolutely. What they both said was spot on, and I totally agree. It is a lower cost, lower time requirement way to engage the general community in aviation without the seeming burden sometimes of going through the additional requirements of the private pilot training. And yeah, it definitely just opens up a lot of vistas of fun, some exciting aircraft that they can fly. One of the ones that we use, for example, are the sport cruisers. So beautiful bubble canopy with the brand new avionics and center stick design and everything. They're just a lot of fun to fly. So yeah, I mean, as an opportunity for a flight school to draw in some students you may have otherwise missed with maybe the costs and requirements of a private pilot, you can start them there as I forget who said, as a stepping stone. I think is a really great way to look at it. And interestingly too, I think it was just about 2 years ago, the FAA changed the regulations a bit where prior to that point, if you had a light sport pilot certificate and then you wanted to convert that to a private pilot, you actually could not count those 20 or so hours toward the private pilot. And as of, I think, August of 2018, they changed that. Thankfully. So now you can actually carry that over. So if down the road someone wants to then take on the additional training toward the private pilot, they can now take those 20 hours and apply that toward the private pilot certificate, so long as they already did achieve the sport pilot certificate. So I thought that was really excellent move.
Yeah. Now you sort of opened this up, and as the CEO of AeroVenture, I think I may know the answer to this, but what exactly is a light sport airplane, and what do you like about it?
So in general, light sport aircraft is typically any aircraft that's with a max takeoff weight of 1,320 pounds, unless you're talking something like the Icon A5. I believe they're allowed to go up to 1,420 pounds for the seaplane capability. But yeah, in general, they can't really go more than 120 knots. So, fairly limited on speed. You can only carry one passenger with you. So if someone wants to become a pilot and, take their family around in a, Cherokee 6 or something like that, it may not be the best option, but they just want to fly around for fun, take a friend up with them once in a while and things like that. Some of the limitations, you can't fly at night as a sport pilot. So you're limited to daytime VFR only and things of that nature. And basically whatever the capabilities of the airplane are as well. Each manufacturer kind of spells out what you can or cannot do in that airplane. So you have to comply with those limitations. And what we like about them is that in a way, it's a low cost option to modernize a fleet. So instead of flying, Piper Cherokees from 1960s or, the 1980s Cessnas, if you want to turn around and buy a new Cessna today, we're talking maybe $500,000. Or even a slightly older one, maybe 20 years old, is somewhere between $190,000 to $250,000 or so. Whereas with a light sport, it depends on the equipment, but you can get them between $120,000 to $180,000. They're very versatile and capable aircraft. It's an attraction to the students because they see a modern fleet with glass panel avionics. The excitement of the center stick I mentioned earlier is really something that students seem to like versus a traditional yoke. And also the aircraft that we operate have a nice canopy view. So the moment you take off, we're just south of Boston. So if you look out, you just see the city just rising on the horizon out before you and everything. And it seems almost unlimited and unrestricted view all around. You feel like you're a part of the sky almost immediately. So I guess one of the things I really like about them is that they're exciting,
Mm-hmm.
for the clients when they come in. And in terms of a few other things too, the maintenance on the aircraft is a bit simpler, and overall, we also like the operational margin is usually a lot better than maybe a traditional airplane, and the maintenance is cheaper, and then you also have the fuel. And a Rotax engine that we operate in the aircraft is usually about 4.5 gallons an hour. So
Oh, wow.
that kind of helps as well, instead of burning 8 or 9.
Sure.
Yeah. So those are just some random thoughts about it.
Mm-hmm. Now, Krishnan, you said that you did your training in a light sport, and now you are doing some instruction in the light sport. What did you like about it?
Apart from, again, what we just spoke about, the affordability and kind of the access to it, availability, a lot of people, they didn't really kind of want to mess with booking the airplanes because they were light sport airplanes. They didn't know much about them, which left them open for training, firstly for me, The second thing is, while initially there was a fairly steep curve in terms of stick and rudder skills, which steeper than what I noticed with the people I teach in 172s and standard training airplanes, it kind of levels off at a certain point and then parallels what I noticed with the standard airplanes as well. And I think even in the people that I've trained in 162s and taken on further to 172s and other airplanes, I think there's a really solid foundation. The airplanes, they tend to be a little more sensitive in your hands. And it really kind of solidifies how you handle the airplane in general. For example, you're teaching crosswind landings, you're teaching sort of, things that require a certain intermediate to advanced level of handling of the airplane. And initially you're going to be yawing and fishtailing all over the place. But once you nail it in these airplanes, once you really move on, because if you take somebody from 162 who's now gone on to do their instrument training in a 172 and you see how they handle the airplane, I think there's a really solid sort of grounding that it gives you in that aspect of flying. So that's a real biggie for me.
Mm-hmm. Dustin, how about you?
Yeah, actually, Kristian's spot on. We have found that when we're training someone in a light sport airplane, that it reveals their lack of understanding, it reveals their lack of skill development, where if you're in a Cherokee or you're in a 172, it's more forgiving. It might cover it up. But it's very apparent when incorrect or out of timing control input is being used by the student in the light sport airplane. And so for that reason, we believe, yes, it is a little harder, but at the end, the product, the pilot that has been developed and trained, they're a better pilot for it. And they can, they're going to be a safer pilot. They're going to understand the forces acting on the airplane. They're going to be able to account for crosswind, asymmetric thrust, adverse yaw, whatever it is. And so we appreciate that aspect. It also forces us to be a better instructor. We have to pay attention. You can never be complacent in a light sport airplane, even though it may be the student's 100th takeoff. If it's a soft tail takeoff, you better be watching it. So we appreciate that aspect.
So Dustin, while I have you, what regulatory differences are there between a sport pilot and a private pilot? I know George sort of touched on it a little bit, but are there any additional details?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the things that makes sport pilot a little harder for the community to wrap their head around, is the fact that in Part 61, subpart J and K are written very differently from the private pilot or commercial pilot or flight instructor sections. So you look at it and it doesn't look the same, and you're like, well, why is this so different, right? I think that was maybe 15 years ago. The FAA was trying to be kinder, gentler, more readable, but I think it actually does a disservice. It was written just the way that regular subparts were for private pilot. I think it'd be a lot easier to parse. If you think about it, a person working for a sport pilot certificate, they've got to go through and be a student pilot first. And so when it comes to solo, they have to comply with the same requirements. forget my numbers, it's 61, 83, or 87. They've got to go through all those 15 areas of training before they can soil the airplane. They've got to get a cross-country endorsement. So that's the same thing under 6193. So for the first, I want to say maybe 2/3 of training, it looks exactly the same as a private pilot. There's a little bit less of it. You don't have to do the 3 hours of flight by reference to instruments. You don't have to do 5 hours of solo cross-country, but you do have to do a solo cross-country. It's kind of distance requirement. You don't have to do night. And so if you want to think about it, the training for a sport pilot compared to a private pilot, it's maybe about 2/3 to 3/4. It still uses a PTS instead of an ACS. So if you're looking at sport pilot PTS, and you remember good old private pilot PTS, it reads pretty much the same. The tasks are slightly slimmed down. And that's probably one of the things I thought to reinforce is that you come out of training for the sport pilot, the standards are similar enough, you're going to receive similar enough training that, I don't think anyone could say that a sport pilot doesn't receive the same quality or was trained the same quality of the standards. We're still operating in the same airspace, same altitudes, same speeds as, for instance, like a 152. And so from that standpoint, I think a sport pilot and a private pilot in the same aircraft are going to have the same capabilities, the same confidence in their skill sets.
So, but from a privileges standpoint, if I remember what George mentioned, it's one passenger, it's daytime only. There's an airspeed requirement. Did you say 140?
It can't be greater than 120 knots.
120. Are there other restrictions between the two?
Well, believe it or not, I think it's 61315C in the FAR is listed about 19 restrictions for LSA pilots in total. I don't have all of them in front of me, but one of them is obviously you can't fly for compensation or hire. It's just like a private pilot. You can't fly in furtherance of a business, which was another one. And maybe if you want to be like a light sport salesman, you actually can't fly the aircraft for a prospective buyer in a demonstration flight and things like that. And it just goes on the list about 19 of restrictions. Just
sure,
like
but I guess the overall gist that I'm hearing from all of this is none of those restrictions are things that would stop somebody from doing it for fun. I mean, there's no reason why you can't have just as much fun going towards a sport pilot certificate as you would anything else.
Exactly. And then there's a restriction on airspace, potentially. You just need to receive an endorsement in order to fly in Bravo, Charlie, or Delta airspace. So that's just something to keep in mind is you might have to, if you don't have that endorsement, you'll have to navigate around those airspaces instead of, through them or what have you. So
sure. Now, gentlemen, I do have one question. Krishnan, go ahead.
The one thing that I've noticed out of all these limitations that we've kind of thrown out back and forth here is, in terms of a new pilot, somebody who's looking at sport airplanes versus standard training airplanes, the one limitation that I've noticed is the fact that they can't continue on it for their instrument training. So for people who sort of have that as their goal or want to use these training airplanes for anything beyond getting a sport pilot, the fact that they can't train, I believe some airplanes allow you to train IFR, but don't actually let you go into IMC.
Correct. Yeah. So to lead on that real quick, an example, the cruisers that we use, the particular models that we purchased originally, they only have a Garmin, so it's 796 in the center console. So we don't have any kind of GPS like a 650 WAS where you can shoot a precision approach or anything like that. So we are in those aircraft limited. However, if we were to purchase the cruisers with the Garmin 650 in it, we can fly IFR, but you're correct. We cannot go IMC in those aircraft or any SLSA for that matter. Interestingly though, I believe in an ELSA, an experimental LSA, properly equipped can actually fly IMC. I've seen, I think, YouTube videos of Bristells, with some nice Garmin equipment flying IMC, light IMC, obviously nothing severe. You wouldn't want to do that in LSA, but yeah, in a training environment, you would have to make sure it's properly equipped. So you could, if we had a cruiser with a Garmin 650, you could go private, you could go sport pilot, private pilot, instrument, commercial, and all the way through CFI.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. So, but you just have to be careful which platform you're choosing and what it has for equipment.
So, it's funny when you talk about the way that the aircraft is equipped, it may have the same advantages that, say, a glider has, that, when you start pulling some of those additional things out, it has the benefit of forcing you to look outside again. And for somebody who does a lot of instrument training, I would love that, to be honest with you. So I think that there's definitely some positives in that as well. So, we talked about the cost advantage to training in LSA. What are the other advantages that somebody might have for choosing that instead of going straight to the private pilot?
The hesitancy someone might have of obtaining a medical certificate might be one reason why they choose that. Another reason might be that they are unsure of what their mission requirements are. They might know they want to earn a pilot certificate, but they're not quite sure they need to fly at night. They're not quite sure they need to fly into complex airspace. They're looking for the recreational side of aviation. And so being able to help them make that decision about what is the right certificate for you to start with, knowing that most of what you do for Sport Pilot is creditable towards earning private pilot in the future. I think that is a great selling point to help people understand that there is this rating that might be tailor fit for their needs. It makes that decision easier.
Now, do you guys find that this is sort of the gateway drug into flying? Once they get the Sport Pilot rating, they have the bug and then they keep going?
I've noticed that.
Yeah.
A fair amount, actually.
Yeah. What's interesting from the school perspective, what we noticed is very few sport pilots that will actually ever graduate because they came in with the idea of sport pilot, cheaper, easier to obtain, get to their goal a little more expeditiously. But then as they start getting into it, they start the fun and the challenge of it. Really, it's the bug bites them, and then there's like, wow, this is really cool. Actually, maybe want to blow past all those restrictions and let's do the night training. Let's do some additional cross country. Let's do some hood flying and all of that. And they get so enraptured by everything that they just want to continue straight over to the private. So we've seen that happen quite a lot where people came in very definitely just want to do sport, want to keep it cheap. And then the next thing they've taken to it and they've gone all the way. So it happens rather frequently.
So expanding this into the CFI discussion, what does it take to upgrade a sport pilot certificate into a sport pilot instructor? Because I believe they can go directly into that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was going to say, first, I think it's helpful to understand that if you are a sport pilot or even a private pilot, you can become a flight instructor without having to do the traditional route of earning your instrument rating and commercial pilot certificate. So anyone with a sport pilot or higher can go and get their first flight instructor certificate, the flight instructor with sport pilot rating, and then teach in light sport airplanes and enjoy all the privileges of a flight instructor, but they are just limited to working with sport pilots in light sport airplanes. That's a great way. I have one of my business partners actually was a flight instructor with a sport pilot for 10 years. Before he then decided to upgrade and add airplane single engine to that flight instructor certificate. So that was a great way for him to try out instructing. He knew he loved teaching. He already had a private pilot rating. He knew he liked light sport airplanes. He was doing that both in gyroplanes and in airplanes, actually. So it worked out very well. But yeah, when it came time to to add airplane single engine to his flight instructor certificate, we were both surprised to learn that the flight instructor PTS doesn't give any credit to those flight instructors with sport pilot ratings. He had to sit for a full practical test and go through FOI again. And so we had to spend quite a bit of time helping him prepare for that. So that was, I'm not going to say surprising. The FAA does stuff like that all the time. But I think it does reveal that there is maybe even a little bit of a structural kind of separation between sport aviation and the traditional aviation training environment that we are used to.
Is the check ride any different? I mean, the gist that I'm getting from you is that if you go that route, it's pretty much the same check ride with the same requirements.
Yeah, exactly the same. It's almost as if you didn't have an existing flight instructor certificate. You're going to go through all the same PTS flight instructor tests.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and I think I kind of always like the idea. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the limited flight instructor certificate that used to exist. I think it was back in the 50s and 60s. Actually, the FAA even played around with a basic pilot certificate way back. I was reading something from 1967, which sounded exactly like light sport. Just several decades prior to when they finally rolled this LSA rule out. But from a flight school perspective, it's kind of an interesting proposition to say, all right, we've got some light sport aircraft. We've got some people who are very enthusiastic about learning to fly, and maybe they don't want to go the whole private instrument commercial route, but they love teaching, and you can identify them. Maybe it's a school teacher or somebody that walks in, or just somebody who in general loves teaching. To go the full route of being a full flight instructor can seem very expensive and burdensome and take a lot of time. But if you can capture that enthusiasm, that interest, and say, hey, cool, you got the sport pilot option, and then the total aeronautical experience time you need is 150 hours before you can apply for the CFIS. So, certified flight instructor with a sport rating. So what a great way to not only capture enthusiasts, at the lower cost option, becoming a sport pilot from one segment of the market, but then also be able to get them on the other side and say, hey, because we have a way of kind of identifying people that seem to really like teaching, and say, we have some ways that we can help you with that. Maybe get, your basic or advanced ground instructor certificate, and we can kind of have you teach some ground schools and whatnot. And now you can say, well, why don't you get your CFI sport as well? And then we can have you teaching other sport pilot applicants coming through as well, and keep them engaged in that way. Also adds it to your instructor base and whatnot as well. So it's also kind of an interesting way to have, maybe if you're running like a career program with sport aircraft, and you have students that come in, you identify those that seem like they'd make really good instructors and encourage them to become a CFIS while they're still working toward their instrument and commercial. So now they're teaching a bit earlier, right? Getting that experience while also working toward the rest of their full, certificates and ratings along the way. So it's another way just to kind of keep them engaged and all of that, and kind of employ them a bit earlier as well in the process, instead of waiting till they get through their instrument commercial and 250 or 300 hours later. So it's kind of a neat little technique you can incorporate into that.
Well, nothing increases your skill level like actually having to go out and teach it. So exactly. So being able to do that a little bit earlier on in your aviation career, I mean, that sounds amazing. So for instructor teaching a LSA student, what are the differences from a preparation standpoint? IACRA, endorsements, finding examiners. Krishnan, what do you think?
Tying into what we were talking about earlier, I believe we can exclusively find sport DPEs as well.
Okay.
Right? So again, like the system where you get your CFIS while training to sort of further your ratings on that front, I believe you can also be a sport DPE, and if you're interested in going that route and that way, you kind of start working with the FAA in that capacity as well. So that I think that's a cool little side thing that I happened to notice while looking up the stuff that we were going to talk about. But yeah, I think it's like I believe Dustin said in the beginning, it sits at about 75%. So in terms of the endorsements, in terms of the experience, and again, IACRA, everything, it's right there. I think that's a sort of a good round figure to use in terms of all the stuff that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So.
What do you think, Dustin?
Yeah, I was going to say, out here in Northern California, we've got some DPEs that just have the privileges to examine sport pilots. And then we do have some, I'll say, traditional DPEs that are private and SEER, commercial instrument rated, that also have LSA on their their letter of authorization from the FAA. And so
Right.
it's nice that we have multiple sources to go through. I will say, though, there is this is interesting. Maybe this is perception and maybe it's just my perception, but I will say that when it comes to a sport pilot check ride, there is a little bit maybe relaxed atmosphere as opposed to when I have the traditional DPE come to a sport pilot rating. He is much more, as you would expect, someone who's going to be examined for a private pilot certificate. So while it's nice that a DPE can create a more relaxed environment, we want to make sure that all our applicants are prepared and for the PTS, and we keep that bar very high. Because especially out here, it doesn't matter what rating you have, we're all sharing the same airspace. So I want every pilot to be safe and competent when they're operating alongside us.
George, same question, but with an additional piece to it. Are there differences in the knowledge section for the sport pilot, or is all of that the same as well?
In general, it's pretty much the same, again, because like Dustin was saying, we're sharing the same airspace. We're kind of doing the same thing. I think on the knowledge test itself, I think is a bit shorter. Don't quote me on this. I think it's about 40 questions. So there's a number of things left off. But in general, yeah, I think it's generally all the same.
So guys, if I'm an instructor who's looking to get into sports instruction, or frankly, if I'm a prospective sport pilot, where would I go to get more information and sort of learn more about sport aviation? Dustin?
I would say that might be not the hardest, but that might be a little bit more of a challenge. I would say in the last couple of years, I've seen more and more flight schools explore using light sport airplanes. I think that has provided more access, but I'm sure there are lots of areas of the country that are underserved with organizations that will provide training in light sport airplanes or have light sport aircraft available to train in. I see down in Southern California, I'm seeing quite a few operations that are using light sport airplanes at even bigger airports, like Long Beach or Hawthorne and things like that. Here in Northern California, we've got light sport aircraft, and I'd say maybe 4 fields around the Sacramento area, so there's quite a bit of access. And so that's probably one of the first challenge that you have to define. The EAA is probably the organization that I would recommend folks make a connection with if they're having trouble. And that's the other thing I was going to say is that, EAA continues to push for innovation in this space. And I think that the definition of sport aviation and sport aircraft is going to continue to evolve over the next couple of years with EAA's Mosaic effort. And so one more thing we're going to have to keep up with, but I think it represents an opportunity for all of us to understand that and support that effort, because it's all with the goal of keeping more people in aviation and bringing more people into aviation.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add, George?
Yeah, no, I think he said it all. I do agree. I think access to light sport aircraft is a bit spotty across the country. I know just in our own New England area here, frankly, I think we're the only ones running light sport aircraft, with the exception of one other school. It's up in New Hampshire. And I think between the two of us, that's pretty much it in the whole New England area. I can't think of anyone else that's operating. I know some that used to, and then they kind of scaled back for a number of reasons. So it's hard to find it, which may lead to one of the reasons why it's maybe not as popular as it could be, is just because of the lack of access to the aircraft or local training facilities to accommodate the local markets. So, but yeah, EAA is a great resource, and I know there are nationally there are even some specialized light sports schools, that do this sort of thing and are very good at it. So, but EAA I think is an excellent resource for it.
So to sort of summarize the conversation and kind of put a little bit of a bow on it, the gist that I've gotten from you guys is that really light sport is not as different from traditional training as a lot of people may think, and a lot of people have this misunderstanding that it doesn't sort of fit. As it's grown, it's actually incorporated itself even further into the training curriculum while allowing for that time to convert into the next rating. The restrictions that people might think that are associated with the training or the aircraft, they're not going to stop anybody from having fun. In fact, in a lot of cases, I think it sounds like it actually would be almost more fun. You get cool airplanes at a cheaper cost. A lot of them, correct me if I'm wrong, would be newer than a lot of the other training aircraft that you would have available to you. And to Krishnan's point, because a lot of people don't understand it, they avoid it. So instead of having a line to wait in, you can go straight to the airplane and start training. Does that about sum it up? Anybody else have any other sort of positive thoughts that you want to mention? I'll start with Krishnan.
Yeah, so the fun aspect is something that I always kind of observed, even though I didn't really know what I was doing even initially while training in them. I'll give you an example. I was doing one of my long cross countries, and I decided to see how high I can take this Cessna 162, right? So here I am bumbling along at 9,500, climbing up to 11,500, and LA Center comes up and says, "Hey, are you climbing?" And I'm like, "Yes, I'm climbing." And as I said it, the engine gave a tired sigh, and I could feel my rate of climb go up to, 50 feet per minute and just kind of stay there. And they're like, and Center comes back and says, "Listen, you got to descend. There's a Boeing 2 miles behind you." All right? He's going to overtake you here in a second. And as I'm descending over there, obviously with my carb heat fully on and everything going on, I'm going down, and I'm acutely aware that there's 4 millimeters of plexiglass between me and the Central Valley, like while I do this spiraling descent and come down. So, there's moments like that. It's fun and it's cool. And I don't think you're not as insulated from flying as you are in the bigger sort of more standard airplanes that you'd come across, Yeah. You're acutely aware of the vibrations and the sounds and the smells, and I think it's wonderful. And I think it's a great way to kind of get initiated into flying as a whole. So,
Yeah, it's incredibly fun, exciting, visceral stick and rudder. And it does. I agree with what Dustin said earlier too. It does kind of expose the flaws in your airmanship and makes you a better pilot by virtue of learning how to fly these airplanes that are a little bit more sensitive. So, yeah, absolutely.
Dustin, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback on the fun part. We had a student who earned his private certificate in a light sport airplane, and then transitioned to a 172 so he could carry a few more people, right? And his comments after a couple of flights, the 172, is something to the effect of, "Wow, this thing is just so boring," right? And you think about it's a 172. I mean, it kind of is, right? It's kind of like a big boxy truck, and you got to kind of really kick it to make it do anything, right? With the light sport airplane, I fly it with the pads on my fingertips. It's just a couple of fingers, and it's just so responsive. It is more fun. That is definitely a selling aspect to it, for sure.
So what I'm hearing is that there's a business venture out there for stick and rudder boot camp using a light sport aircraft.
Right on.
So, all right. Well, guys, I very much appreciate your time. And to those out there watching this presentation, I highly encourage you to get more information on LSA. There's a lot of opportunity in this aspect of aviation, both in training, but as well as, like the guy said, fun.